Hello, this video will review how to build quizzes with question pools into D2L. So we're specifically going to look at building a quiz directly into D2L. We're not going to be talking about how to use a third party like Respondus. We're also going to be focusing on how to pull the questions in from a question pool or a random section bank. In this particular video, we're not going to specifically talk about building the questions individually. So before we get started, let me walk through the different sections that are available when you're building the quizzes. It can look overwhelming at first, but if you look at it section by section, it's very doable. On the left panel, you have the main section. This is where you're going to give the name of the quiz. You're going to associate it to a grade item in the gradebook. You can choose to input a due date here. It's actually optional because there's another place where you're going to put the start and the end date. And this is also where you add in your quiz questions, either build them from scratch or how we're going to show in this video how to build them using the question library. The next section is speaking of the availability. That's where you have the start and end date of the quiz. But that is very important to put in for this particular quiz. You can choose to put in release conditions if you want. That is optional. You may use special access, particularly when you need to give a student special access, more extended time for ADA, or if maybe they've missed the quiz and you're going to allow them to make it up at some point. And then you also have the ability to put in the password, which usually you would only do if you're going to be using if the students are going to be taking this test via a proctored type of assessment, either on campus or using a proctoring software. Next, we have the timing and display. The time limit here is how long they have to take once they open the exam. And then you have how many questions per page, as well as the ability to turn on shuffling. You won't necessarily use shuffling as much if you're building a quiz bank, if you're pulling from a quiz bank, as if you would if you're building the questions straight into D2L and everybody's getting the same number of questions. This is also where you can restrict the D2L exam or the D2L email during the exam, which will prevent them from sending emails during that time. Mainly under the attempts and completion block, you're mainly just going to be putting in the amount of attempts that is allowed for that quiz. In most cases, it's 1. Sometimes you could allow for 2 or 3, and then maybe it takes the highest grade or the average of the grade or the last attempt or something of that nature. With the evaluation section, there are 2 buttons that you want to make sure to click. That is going to auto-push the grades to the D2L gradebook. And there's also a section where you're able to choose what the student's going to be able to see after they submit the exam in terms of their final grade, in terms of the questions that they missed, those types of things. Before you start building the quiz, you may want to go ahead and upload the question pool or the quiz bank into your D2L. So more than likely you would have gotten that from a publisher's test website or some other external source. So to upload that file, which is usually going to be in the form of a zip file into D2L, you'll want to go into your course and then choose Course Admin and then Import Export Copy Components, and then you're going to import those components. So again, this is going to be a zip file that you would have downloaded from the publisher's website. So we're going to let that import. There may be multiple zip files that you need to upload. For example, this one's just for chapter 1. There may be, sometimes publishers' test banks build them per chapter. Some just give you a massive zip file with all the quiz questions for the entire book or reference all in one. Okay, so now that it is imported, we're going to go ahead and view that content. Now we want to create the quiz. So we'll choose New Quiz, and then we'll see the similar setup that we just looked at earlier with the different sections. So we'll go ahead and give it a name. And then we want to associate it to the gradebook. So we have some options here. If we choose not in gradebook, that just means that it is not going to be associated to the gradebook at all. They'll be able to take the quiz, but the grade will never push over to the D2L gradebook. Or we can choose to edit or link to an existing item, which would be in the case of you've already created the gradebook and you're just going to link the items together. If you haven't created the item in the D2L gradebook, you would add to gradebook and it would automatically create a grade item in the gradebook and name it whatever the name of your quiz is. So that's what we have done in this case. So we're going to choose to add it in the gradebook and it's going to create that grade item for us. Now we're going to choose the amount of points that it is worth. So this can be any number from 1 on up. A lot of people make their quizzes out of 100 points, but you don't have to. We can put in a due date here. Keep in mind this is a soft deadline. The start and the end dates are actually over here under availability, so I'm going to use those instead because the due date really doesn't stop them from submitting the exam. Now we're going to skip on down here below to the questions area. You can choose to add a description. This would be something like a description of the amount of quiz questions, how long they have to take it, any other information that they might need before they take the exam. So from here we would actually put in our quiz questions. We can create new and add the questions in themselves individually, but what we're going to do in this case is build this out of a question pool based upon those quiz items and questions that we just imported in. So we're going to choose a question pool. And we're going to give it a title. I normally just name it whatever the name of the chapter is and then question pool to make it easy to recognize. Then we're going to browse from the question library, and then we'll want to come over here to the side and find our source. So here I'll pick the question library itself, and then I'll see a listing of all the questions. So what I can do from here, you notice there are 92 questions. I can cherry pick the questions. I can choose this icon and it will open up a pop-up and I can see what the question is and determine if I want to keep it, or I can just bulk import them. Something that you want to make sure that you do is look at the style of question it is. So a lot of these are multiple choice. Sometimes you see some of them are written responses, and remember those are manually graded, so it may be that I don't necessarily want to include those, so I might uncheck those and only include the multiple choice. Once we select the ones and import them in, we'll see them listed here. Notice if I try to go back and import more in, it will tell me that I've already imported some so that I don't duplicate it and actually import the same question more than once. So now we see that I have imported a total of 72 questions. I can then choose how many I want each student to get. It could be that I want them to get all 72 just in a random order, or it could be that I want to get them to get a subset. So maybe I only want them to get 25 each, or 20 each, or 15 each, or what have you. In that case, each student's going to get randomly 20 out of the 72 possible. You would also want to determine the point value here of how many each question is worth. Now I'll go ahead and save. And this will import my question pool. So to double check, we see that it is worth 100 points, and it tells us right here that it's selecting 20 out of the 72 possible. So you do want to make sure that your question pool is set up correctly that way. If you need to make edits, you can of course click on it, and then you'll be able to add or delete or browse your question library and add in more questions as needed. In addition, I have the ability to add in extra questions or add in even another question pool. Maybe this is chapter 1 and 2 quiz, and I've added in a question pool for chapter 1 and I want to create a question pool for chapter 2. In that case, I would just create a new question pool and do the exact same process, but make sure to pull in chapter 2 questions. So now that we have our questions in place, we want to move over to our other settings. So we'll start with availability dates and conditions. This is where you put in the start and end date. This is a very important piece to your quiz. The start date is the first time the student can open the quiz and begin to take it. The end date is the last time they can open the quiz to begin to take it. So if I put it on the 29th at 11:59, right at that time, it will allow them to open it, but after that point, it's not going to allow them to open it. Now, once they open it, they do have the full ability to take however long we've allotted for them to take the quiz. So if we have it allotted to be an hour, they open it at this time, they still have that hour to complete the quiz. Remember, the end date is different than the due date. The due date is a soft deadline, so it could be that I have the due date to be on the 28th, but the end date to be on the 29th. If they take it, say, early in the morning on the 29th, it would tell me that it was a day late, but it won't stop them from taking it until this end date, which is the end of the day on the 29th. So sometimes people just don't put in a due date because they let that end date be the due date and not have two separate deadlines there. The next option here is the release conditions. This is where you would say a student must do this before they can take this quiz. It may be that they must take this other quiz or get a grade for this other activity, or at least open this particular file before they can open this quiz. That is more of an advanced feature, so I'm not going to put that in place yet. Then we're going to do the special access. So we're going to choose to manage the special access, and this is the case of where a student needs additional timing, or a student needs to take the quiz on a different date other than the one listed because maybe they need to take it early or take it later for some reason. So in that case, I will add the users to special access. I would be able to put in whatever start and end date that is for that particular student. I would be able to put in whatever time limit for that particular student, and then I would be able to just select that particular student. And that's giving him or her that special access while everybody else is following this time window or date window and the time window that we're going to put in just a second. This particular user will have a separate set. They'll still get the same questions. It'll still push over to the D2L gradebook like everyone else. They just have that special timing. Also under this area is the password. This is you would really only put this in place if you were having a proctoring situation to where they're going to a testing center, they're testing in class, or perhaps they're using some type of third-party proctoring system like ProctorU to where they would have to have a password to be put in. In most cases, if you're just having a date window and they can take it anytime between that window, you probably don't really need a password there. Scrolling on down, we'll do the timing and display. By default, it's set to have no time limit, so once they open the quiz, they have as long as they want to submit it. It may be that you want to put a cap on that. So you can manage time and enforce a time limit and say maybe they have 60 minutes to take this exam with a 1-minute grace period. The 1-minute grace period, or however long grace period you put in, is just giving them that full 60 minutes and then 1 extra minute to hit the submit button. Very important here, you want to make sure to change, in most cases, the option to the second, which is prevent the student from making further changes. What happens is after 61 minutes here, it freezes their exam. If they make any changes, it doesn't save it, and they have to submit their exam and it is graded as is. By default, it is set to allow the student to continue working, which means after 61 minutes, it will let you know that it's late, but it still continues to let them take the quiz for however long they want, and then it grades it appropriately as if they had not ran out of time. So in most cases, you do want, once the time is open, to kind of freeze the exam. So you want to change it to the second option here. Scrolling on down, you could choose to display all the questions on one page together. That is the default. Or you might change it to 1 question per page, which is what we encourage, just so that the student doesn't get overwhelmed by seeing all the questions on one page. And it also will track when they move from one page to the next. So if you need to ever look at that type of data, you'll have it in place. You can also choose to prevent going back to previous pages. That would basically mean they can move forward only. They can't really skip around in the quiz. But without checking this button, basically they'll have 1 question per page, but they can still jump around or go back to check their answers later on. The next option is to shuffle the questions. If you're doing a question pool and it's randomly pulling 20 out of 72, you won't need to shuffle the questions. This is mainly done if you have maybe the set of everyone's getting the same 10 questions. It would shuffle them and give all those 10 questions in a random order, but not something you would really do if you're using a question pool. You do probably want to leave checked disable email and instant messages so that the student isn't able to use those communications in D2L during the process of taking the exam. So next we'll move on to attempts and completion. Here we'll manage those attempts, and you'll choose how many attempts they have to take this particular quiz. In most cases it's just 1 attempt, but you could change it to a certain number of amount and have it record their average of those attempts, their highest of those attempts, or you could even do something like unlimited and then record their first attempt to where they get a grade on the first time they take it, but then they can continue to take it over and over to just practice the questions. And that often works well if you are using a question pool, because they'll be randomly getting new questions to practice. Lastly, we have the evaluation and feedback section. There are a couple of very important things in this particular block. The first is to make sure that you check these two boxes, which is going to help the grade push over into the D2L gradebook. So there's three things that you really have to check to make sure the grade goes over into the gradebook. First is to make sure to associate it to the grade item here in the main section. And then second is to make sure that these two boxes are clicked to be able to make sure that it does push over. Then this section is showing what the students are able to see once they submit the quiz. So by default, you might set it to where they see their grade, but no questions. You could also choose to where they see their grade and they see incorrect questions, the questions that they answered incorrectly with that correct answer showing, or you might choose to show incorrect questions without the correct answer showing, so they have to go back and look those up, or you could just show them all the questions without any answers, or all the questions with the correct answers. By default, oftentimes the teacher will set it to where they can see their grade but no questions, and then you could actually add in an additional view, and you would do that under Customize Quiz Results Displays. That will open, this is the primary view that we just set up a minute ago, and this is what they see by default. So we'll edit that view just so that you can see it again, but by default it's set to just say you've successfully completed your quiz. It's going to show them their grade, and it's not going to show them any questions at that point. But what we can do is add in an additional view. In that case, I would choose when they see that grade, when they see this additional view. A lot of times you might want to choose it right after the quiz period ends, either that same day or into the next day, so that you've assured that everybody has submitted their quiz at that point. And then you might give them a message of, so that they know what they're looking at. These are the questions that you missed. I might choose to let them see their grade, but then I might say you can see the incorrect questions, the questions that you answered incorrectly, and then I could choose to show the correct answers or not. In this case, if I don't choose to show the correct answers, it'll just tell them you missed these questions. They would go and look up their own there. You could also choose to show the learner's grade for the displayed questions. What this does is actually show them if they got the points or how many points they got per question. This one is showing just their overall grade. So this might say that I, scored a 98 out of 100, but this is going to show me specifically where I earned points on each question or lost points on each question. You can also choose to display the average or the grade distribution if you want. We'll create that, and now we see that I have the primary view, which is the default view, and then I have the additional view. It comes into effect on a certain date, and it has a little bit of a different view for them. So we'll choose OK there, and now I'm able to see that we do have the initial view here, the primary view or the default view, and then we have that additional view coming into effect. So that is the main settings that you would want to do to create your quiz with your question pool. You do want to, down here at the bottom, to change the visibility. By default, it is invisible because it may take you a little while, maybe a couple of hours or a couple of days, stop and go to create your quiz. And you don't want it to become available or visible to the students until you're completely finished with it. So I would wait until you have it completely finished and all your settings in, and then change the visibility and save and close. And then what you'll see here is that the quiz is now available. It has your dates on set in place. It is associated to a grade item, and it does have special access because I did put that in for that one particular student. This is visible to the students now. They can at least see it. Now, granted, they won't be able to open it or take it except during the time window. But if I needed to make this invisible for the students, I could always select it and choose Hide from Users. And then we see this closed eyeball symbol, which means despite the date range here, they're not able to see it. When I am ready for them to view it, I would just check it again and turn to make it visible. But again, even though it's visible, the date range is going to be put in place to where they won't be able to see it till that particular date range. So lastly, another thing that you may want to do is to add this quiz to the content area. So we'll go to content, and we may want to make a module for it. Maybe it's in a certain chapter, maybe it's in a certain folder. You have, if you're doing your class by chapters or by topics, you would want to define those out, but you would have your module and then existing activities, quizzes, and then you would pick the name of the quiz and it would add it right here. So this is just a double link. They can get to it here, but they can also get to it from within the quizzes area right here as well.